the Soviets said, we heard Armstrong and Apollo 11 say, these babies are huge. They're huge. They're warning us off. They're on the edge of the crater. And there's this whole conversation on the medical channel about how the Apollo 11 astronauts were effectively assaulted and scared off by huge spacecraft on the moon, which were not there to greet them. They got the sense that they were there to say, get the hell out of here.
What other things about the moon, like other than, like we mentioned, the distance from the sun to the moon and how it perfectly occludes the sun from our perspective, but like what other things about our moon are exclusive to our moon?
So first of all, there's the extremely bizarre ratio that you just mentioned, right? Where this 1/400th size of the sun, 1/400th distance from the sun.
Yep.
And that's what produces these eclipses. Then there's an incredible stability of the orbit of the moon.
Okay.
Then, as we mentioned, these craters don't make any sense, right? These craters don't make any sense. And the basin of them seems like it's revealing a shell of some kind, a spherical shell.
Yep.
Then there's the impact tests, right? The Apollo 12 and Apollo 13, where the moon on a seismograph registered like a hollow object.
Right.
And by the way, there's no moon that's a hollow object. Back before Carl Sagan became such a skeptic, he even commented on this and said that it's terrifying because no natural satellite is hollow. Back then,
we know that no other moons are hollow?
Yes, we know it.
How do we know?
It's just not what moons are. Moons are like, they're like rocky bodies that are trapped by a planet, and they're rocky all the way through.
And do we observe the craters on other moons to see how similar they are to our moon or how different they are than our moon?
Yeah. We have detailed, like, for example, Phobos and Erebus, the moons of Mars. We have detailed images of them. And first
how
of all,
many moons does Mars have?
It has 2.
2 moons.
Saturn and Jupiter have a bunch.
Right.
And, the other thing about these moons are they're all weird shaped. They look like deformed potatoes, a lot of them. They're not beautiful spherical objects like ours is. But there is another interesting thing, and that's the mass cons. So there are these, the moon has a lower gravity than Earth generally, right? Remember the golf ball thing?
Yep.
So, and the Apollo astronauts,
we'll
get to them too, the Apollo astronauts, hopping around, in the lower. But there are places on the moon where there's a much stronger gravity. There's Earth-like gravity or stronger than Earth-like gravity. And it's actually a problem for navigation because when they pass satellites over, they can't fly too low because the craft will be pulled by these gravity wells. There are places on the moon, they call them mass concentrations, where the gravity deviates from the standard on the moon.
Wow.
And guess what? They're all perfectly circular. So one thing I hypothesized in Closer Encounters was that if this thing is a space station, it's possible that they built saucers into the surface of it.
Look at that. Mascons, short for mass concentrations, the regions of the moon's surface with a higher gravitational pull than the surrounding areas. These anomalies were first identified in the 1960s. Holy shit.
Yeah, they have to compensate for those when they fly anything around the moon. Anyway, look, here's the thing.
We got to make sure we got to keep you on point here.
Yeah. So,
we can't be just letting Jorjani fly by the seat of his pants.
One possibility is that when they built the space station, they built saucers into the surface of it. Remember, all the mascons are circular. A saucer is going to have a 0-point energy drive generating a
flying saucer?
Yeah, a flying saucer.
Okay.
Is going to have a local gravitational field.
Yeah.
And if there's people in the saucer, it's 1G.
Yes.
Which is greater gravity than the rest of the moon. So one possibility is that what these mascons are saucers embedded in the space station underneath the regolith as a potential evacuation protocol. Suppose there's a danger, like if some giant asteroid is coming that might hit the Earth or it might hit the moon, and they need to evacuate the station, right? Well, these saucers could just peel off the surface. So that's one possibility of what these mascons are. It are, saucers with 0-point energy drives running embedded into the surface of the object.
What do you make of the post-game press conference after the moon landing, where all the astronauts are sitting there? They look like they're on a hostage tape.
This is where I wanted to go next. We mentioned the astronaut, right? So, these guys don't even remember what they did up there. When you ask them, they've done interviews with these astronauts. And when you ask them, so what did you do on such and such a day? They basically rehearse a mission log. We did this, and then we... No. I mean, how did you feel like when you were standing on the edge of that? And then they freeze up. They start to look ill. And so like you're saying in that press conference, right? They don't look like national heroes coming back from having been the first men on the moon.
Like hostages.
They look like they've had the shit scared out of them or, yeah. So I think that these people saw some terrifying things up there. And that's also what Soviet intelligence thought. In Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret, British UFO researcher, was close to Admiral Norton, Admiral Lord Hill Norton, British Navy, was one of the people who endorsed his Timothy Good's work. Mm-hmm. And in his book, Above Top Secret, Timothy Good recounts a meeting between British intelligence and Soviet intelligence back during the Cold War. And the Soviets said, we were listening to the medical channel during Apollo. They had a channel that they would use to report back like medical emergencies, things they didn't want the public to hear. A separate channel from the one that was being broadcast across television. And, unsurprisingly, the KGB had found access to this.
They weren't supposed to have access.
Even our ham radio operators were listening to this in America. Some ham radio operators said that they were able to pick up on this too. So the Soviets said, we heard Armstrong and Apollo 11 say, these babies are huge. They're huge. They're warning us off. They're on the edge of the crater. And there's this whole conversation on the medical channel about how the Apollo 11 astronauts were effectively assaulted and scared off by huge spacecraft on the moon, which were not there to greet them. They got the sense that they were there to say, get the hell out of here. So, people have all these...
Who was the person that said this? And this was somebody...
It was a conversation between a British intelligence officer. You can find it in Timothy Good's book, Above Top Secret.
Above Top Secret, okay.
Yeah, and it was a British intelligence operative who toward the end of the Cold War, was meeting with a Soviet counterpart. Okay. And the Soviets said, we have the record of this conversation between Armstrong and ground control on the medical channel, where they were saying they saw Now, that would scare the shit out of you.
Yeah.
Moreover, by 69, 70, they had already done this MK Ultra stuff.
Yes.
Right?
So you think they wiped their memory somehow?
Yes, exactly. We had already done this MK Ultra stuff. And I think these poor guys were MK Ultra'd when they came back to try to get them to forget as much of what happened on the moon as possible. And that would also explain why they all wound up with dysfunctional lives. These guys all became alcoholics.
Right.
Their wives divorced them all. Their personal lives became a disaster. Mm-hmm. So, yeah, that's another piece of corroboration that, the moon is inhabited. And it's also probably an artificial satellite.
And why haven't we been back since?
Exactly.
There was we watched this interview multiple times on previous podcasts where I think it's the head of NASA is being he's being interviewed in front of the Senate. And they're talking about China, how they had a plan to map or explore the dark side of the moon or whatever. And they asked him, like, if we plan on doing it too. And he goes, no, we're not interested in doing that. We have no interest in the dark side of the moon.
You know what I find profoundly disturbing about that is that humiliation is the worst thing in Chinese culture. The worst thing, okay? So the Chinese are not about to go up to the moon and have their asses handed to them. Moreover, the Chinese are going to the moon in collaboration and cooperation with the Russians. The Chinese and the Russians plan to build a space station that orbits the moon and then send astronauts from the space station down to the surface of the moon, right? If there's that degree of cooperation between Russia and China on the moon, it means the Soviet dossier has been handed over to the Chinese.
And Soviet dossier?
Yeah, the Soviet dossier on the moon.
Oh.
Okay?
Okay.
What's in that?
Right.
Everything the Americans encountered on the moon, which is why the Soviets never went to the moon. Remember, we were competing with the Soviet Union to go to the moon.
Yeah.
Why is it that we went up there and then all the Soviets just decided to cancel their moon program? No.
They knew.
Of course they knew. They knew. And also there were discussions in the Soviet Union at that time that, okay, if America makes it to the moon first, we'll go to Mars first. They figured it out. Neither are for the taking, neither the moon nor Mars. So what's really disturbing about the Chinese initiative is that if the Chinese of all people are planning to go up there and, I don't know, if not colonize, at least do some scientific research or whatever, right? It means they've gotten clearance.
From the people that are there?
That's right. That's right. Now, and notice how the balance of power is shifting in the world toward China.
Is it really?
It is. Now,
people have different opinions online. I don't know who to believe.
Look, I mean, it has been. Now, whether that can be reversed is another question. But if you wanted to manage a global totalitarian state,
yes,
with ubiquitous surveillance and an extremely technocratic form of government, with little personal freedom, right? A control society on a global scale, the Chinese would be the optimal people to put in charge for that.
Yeah.
Because it fits the values of Confucianism.
Yes.
Okay? So if someone on the moon, potentially also on Mars, wants to impose a totalitarian world government on Earth, they're not going to make a deal with the United States. They're going to make a deal with China. That's what I find most disturbing about Chinese plans to go to the moon. I actually don't think we would even be going back there if it weren't for the fact that Chinese already are.
Yeah, but okay, maybe. But who would they make the deal with in the United States? That's the thing. There's two parts of the United States. There's the idealistic view of the United States, and then there's the real people who are running the show behind the scenes in the United States. And they probably are very envious of China's totalitarian surveillance state that they live under. So,
I'm not sure. It's very easy to make these kinds of moral judgments. If I were in Lockheed at a high level with security clearance to the special programs that are dealing with zero-point energy and electrogravitic drives, I'm not so sure that, considering the kind of society we have in this country, let alone in the world at large, I would publicly disclose that technology. I mean, we talked about this last time, I think. The weaponization implications and dual use potential of such technology is extremely socially destabilizing. So the thing is, with China, you can manage technology and control information in that way.
Yes, totally.
Based on the ideals of the Bill of Rights and the United States Constitution, you can't.
It makes it way harder.
Right. So they have a good negotiating partner in China.
Oh, yes. That makes a ton of sense. It does.
So even if you're in Lockheed, you're stuck behind all these walls of classification and these security oaths that you've taken, you might still believe in the ideals of the Bill of Rights. And you might not be ready to sell out, at least the American citizenry, to a foreign power or an alien power that intends to subjugate the planet and, subject us to a global tyranny. So, yeah, I'm not convinced that even people in the deepest strata of the deep state are so, how can I put it, callous and nihilistic and self-serving that they would make a deal with people who want tyranny over to the planet. In fact, I wouldn't be at all surprised if for a long time they've kept these technologies close to the chest in order to develop some kind of a deterrence capability or to approach parity, technological and military parity.
With what? With them?
With the people on the moon.